as human, we all have both masculine and feminine energy. You know, it's where we lean, which side we lean more, right? And unfortunately, since decades, you know, toxic masculinity has been celebrated at home, and especially at work, to show authority and leadership.
Yes,
So
I agree.
Tell me, Bonny. So what is to you is what actually is toxic masculinity? Because I'm sure not everyone know what it is.
Well, there is no one absolute definition of toxic masculinity. I would first state that masculinity is a social construct. It's gender. It has nothing to do with men or women. So it's not hating on men at all. And I think the term is probably not really useful in opening good and meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of, it polarizes people very early on, very quickly, and men can become very defensive very quickly.
Yeah.
Men are not, you know, toxic. I'm not toxic, and so it's not about men or women. It's about masculinity. And masculinity is a social construct, and I would say that it's what society assigns to the attributes society assigns to be masculine. So it's more of a social thing than it is of a individual thing. And the toxic part is the elements of that masculinity or perceived masculinity or the social construct, the elements that are negatively affecting men, women, and society at a large. And so there is dominance, I would say, aggression, then also the suppressing of emotions and the inability to form truthful, vulnerable relationships. I think that is typically what toxic masculinity is referred to, or at least for the purpose of this conversation. I think that might be the term we can use. It's the social perception of males, really.
Yeah.
And if I could change the term, I would say I would change toxic masculinity to damaging social norms, but nobody would know what I'm talking about at this stage.
But you can write an article about it. You know, you can that would be very interesting.
I shall right after this interview.
And please let me know. I'll be sharing it around. So, one question that arises, right, that I want to ask you, just in your opinion, do you believe that men in general, or at least most men, think that they or believe that they are superior to women? So superior than women, and yeah.
How much time do you have? Look, I don't know is the short answer, because I don't know all men, and you know, I like my viewpoint of men is very narrow. I'm coming from I was born in Germany, so I've got like a Northern European viewpoint on masculinity. I never lived in, you know, rural mainland China or some, I have no idea. So that I would bring it back to my experience in the world. So I'm born with a lot of privilege. I'm a white, straight male, German-born, now Australian. Like a lot of doors are wide open for me by default.
Do you know what? Sorry to interrupt
Yes.
you on this. This is the second time I speak to you, and that you acknowledge that, you know, that I'm a white guy, privileged, things like that. And that's very touching to me, because not many people would say, you know, I just like your honesty, and you say as it is, you own it, and it is the truth. As much as, and it got nothing to do, I think a lot of people think, you know, because they are being humble, a lot of them are being humble, but there are a lot of people do have the privilege more than others.
Yes, it's and well, I sort of started unpacking my privilege after George Floyd was killed in America, and I was coaching a Black female founder at the time, and so it was not only gender, and it was also skin color, race, and identity, and so on and so on, and then talking about equity, inclusion, equality, and institutional racism, and all this sort of stuff came up, and we had a lot of discussions, and it helped me unpacking a lot of my blind spots. So privilege, generally speaking, is not a bad thing. If you're blind to it, and if you don't use it and share it, that's a bad thing. But, you know, like having certain abilities or gifts, or, you know, having the ability to open doors in that, I think it's a good thing. You know, I don't think privilege by default is bad. Yeah, but acknowledging it, that, you know, when two people meet halfway up a mountain, it's not just the fact that they're both halfway up the mountain. You have to see where they started walking, and, you know, one of them might only have one leg. So it's sort of, it's not the same. Even if you're at the same place, doesn't mean that it means the same. So you always have to see everything in context. And a lot of these things, a lot of this privilege, I was totally blind to that. And there's still many, many more areas where I find myself being surprised. Go like, yeah, you know, like I recently met somebody with a Syrian passport, and I go like, wow, with a Syrian passport, you can't go anywhere in the world. There's like 4 countries, including North Korea. And that's it, you know, and I've got an Australian passport. I can go wherever I want, you know, and so, and there's yet another level of privilege that I have, you know. They cannot open bank accounts. I can go wherever I want and open a bank account. I moved to the US. I lived in Manhattan for 6 years, you know, like no problem. So there's a lot of privilege, a lot of layers to that. And one of them, of course, is between genders, you know, all of them. And I think a lot of the toxic masculinity might stem from the fear of losing that privilege. It's, you know, for a lot of men, it's very convenient and very pleasant, and there might be a general feeling that it's either them or me sort of thing, and that's not true. There's enough to go around for all of us, sort of thing, you know. And sharing privilege is actually enriching everybody's lives, in my experience.
What kind of privilege do you think, to name a few, that men would have over others?
That men have over, and again, men,
that they're afraid, basically, in your opinion, they're afraid of losing the privilege that they have. So what
I think it's a fair question. In a lot of traditional male dominated societies, you know, like women couldn't vote until a certain time in history. Women were not allowed to have certain jobs. Women were not allowed in the military. Women were, there was a lot of doors were closed for women, and they were wide open for men. And so in a company, you know, when there was promotion time, women were regularly overlooked, or they were not even in the room, and that sort of stuff. And that is, of course, very convenient, you know, like it's sort of, you know, you get selected for a certain privilege, for a certain position, by no other means than your gender. That's pretty lame, right? So, and but as I said earlier, like when two people meet at the halfway up the mountain, one is a man, one is a woman, very broad generalization. But in my experience over the last decades in business, when you meet a man and a woman in the same position, the woman has more grit and has worked so much harder and is twice as smart because it was harder for her to get to the same position.
Yeah.
So, and that forms a certain level of, that's a threat. So if I'm sitting in the room and there's 4 men on this side and 4 women on this side, they're usually a lot more competent, because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten there in the first place. Like, as society changes, that changes, of course, as well. But, you know, traditionally, it's so much harder to get there. You have to be better at everything. You have to work harder, be smarter, get up earlier and go to bed later, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I like that.
And that's threatening.
Yeah.
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 That I agree with you, actually. Yeah. Although I never thought of it that
Yeah.
way, but now that you mention it, it makes total sense. And she's true, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So there might also be like social pressure and cultural norms. You sort of don't even think about it. You know, that's just how things are. And everything around me is amplifying that. Apart from the power and the privilege, I think then, you know, and then there is that element of insecurity and fear. You know, like, if you're smart enough, you find out that these women in the room are fiercely intelligent and could quite easily, like, they're better than me, you know. So how can I sort of get them out of the competition? I play my male privilege card, I guess. But all of that is more or less probably a lack of exposure and education, I would say. Like, these things start at home, you know, these things start with how we raise our boys.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not very, very important, how fathers raise their boys and what role model they provide. And to a degree, there is some responsibility also to the mothers and what female role model they provide to their children. So I'm coming from a 3rd generation strong female households. Like my grandmother was the first woman in the family with a degree. She was an editor for a very large publishing house in Germany. Her mother lost her husband in the First World War and was left with 13 children.
Wow.
That's 13 children, like, during and after the First World War, and then into the Second World War. And she was amazing. She was like a superhuman, and she got them all through and raised them. And she, you know, like, she lived off the land and had like medicine from the land, and she was incredible. And then my grandmother, she was super smart. You know, she was much smarter than her husband, and he fully accepted that. He was a house builder, and he adored her for that. And then my mother, you know, taking over the business and so on. So I grew up with very strong women around me, and I'm not really scared, or it doesn't intimidate me. I find it very inspiring. And, like, I think of course, there are feminine properties and masculine properties that can be very helpful in life. And I think that we should all grab the best bits of everything. So I'm a very nurturing person. I love being a father, for example. you know, and I carry my baby around all night until it until it burps, and that sort of thing that came very natural to me.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about female, you know, being intimidating, strong, things like this. I just realized this actually a few days ago. I had a conversation with my friend over the phone, discussing about some things. And then I guess the last 2 weeks, I was so recently I've adapting even more. So I have this word acceptance and softening. I'm adapting this more into my life, and being an observer. And then I could see some shifts. I can hear a few things more louder, you know. And then I had a conversation with my friend, and then one of the things we were saying about you know, intimidating. So through my life, it wouldn't be uncommon that people tell me that I'm intimidating, you know, and you've met me. So intimidating is, you know, so my question over the years, to them is, am I intimidating or are you intimidated? You know, but I know, I mean, to you, I'm not. And I tell my friends in Dubai, they laugh, right? I say I experience this more when I come back to Singapore, and I've been in Singapore now almost 6 years. But I realize something now is that they probably not use, and along the way, so what I did, what I didn't even realize. So my greatest realization a few days ago is that then, so I love dressing up. So, you know, already I'm somebody, you know, I give inputs whenever needed. I'm not afraid. I'm a huge learner, but I'm also not afraid to own my space. At the same time, I love dressing up, but even my dressing up will be commented by some of people. You know, you know, like. So what I realized, what I did, whether to certain women that I feel that might be intimidated by me, or men, I actually start dressing down. I didn't realize it until a few days ago. Then I just realized, oh my God, part of my coaching is to embrace people, the parts of themselves that they are not proud of, things like this. And I just realized I just been watering down my own gifts to make other people comfortable, you know, and yeah, so I'm like, okay, no, I'm gonna step in. I'm not gonna dress down. I'm just gonna dress what I want to dress. It's gonna be me, and shift away, you know, from the fear of being who I am to make another person comfortable.
I think that is, yeah, you got to be yourself, and I think it would but finding what that is usually the difficult part.
I think it's
and
all
understanding
layers by layers, right? Like finding, like I mean, over the years, I believe I am more and more myself. So it's so enlightening, so to say, that I discovered this part that I really think I'm so comfortable in myself, but I didn't realize I am, you know, watching this part of myself to make some people comfortable. And yeah, I know it's no wonder, you know, like some people then will use certain techniques maybe to, you know, to make me feel a little bit smaller or belittle me in some ways.
Some people need that. I think it might boil down to confidence and self-love. And it's very common knowledge that people who don't have a lot of self-confidence and self-love, they need to push other people down to feel a little bit higher.
Yeah.
And once you understand that, it's just an expression of weakness. And, you know, if you care, you can show them kindness and guide them into a better place, or you can just ignore them, you know.
Yes. I
or
remember.
you can tell them how you really feel. I mean, like, it really depends on the situation.
That's true.
But, you know, people who have nothing positive to say and do not support me, you know, I think it's very important for us to, first of all, understand who we are and finding that out. And that is usually through letting things go, as you said earlier, you know, like you can't fight if your armor is getting too heavy, sort of thing. You have to, you know, drop it a little bit. And then when you are authentically present yourself, have a large amount of internal validation.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with external validation. It's great to get a shoulder pat and praise, you know, or a compliment. It's wonderful. But do not rely on it. You know, like if it doesn't come, that's cool too.
Yeah.
Right? You need enough internal validation. And then I present myself in this life, and I find it very, very important. You know, the old saying, you know, when you lay down with dogs, you wake up scratching. I love dogs, by the way. It's sort of this thing that
and you
if you
actually just
surround
scratch
yourself.
your head as you said it. I
Yeah,
don't know if you realize.
I shaved earlier, and I think I didn't put lotion on that spot. I think it's the expression for be careful who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's as important as it is to surround yourself with uplifting and supportive and beautiful people.
Yeah.
It's just as important, if not more important, to avoid and clean out my relationships from toxic people, right? From people who like energy vampires, you know, like people who drag me down with whatever it is, their negativity and so on and so on. I think that's very important. And that extends all the way to the business job environment. Just because this job pays more than that job doesn't mean I need to be there. You know, like if it's not if it's a toxic environment, no money in the world is worth working there, sort of thing.
Totally, yeah. I actually stepped down from the project. So this was earlier this year, and I told you because I mean at first I felt so amazed that I was chosen for this big project. So it was great. So my friends were so happy. Like I felt like it's like a great opportunity, you know. And but I sat on it after about a month and a half. I leaned to my heart. I stepped down because no amount of money is, is worth my mental health. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the beautiful things about understanding where your North Star is. You know, why do I live? Why am I on this planet? What's my purpose in life? Once we understand that, I have a certain clarity on that, we have the luxury of ignoring unhelpful opportunities. I mean, opportunities come, the higher the privilege, the more opportunities come, but there are things that come our way, and if we are not entirely sure what it is we want to do and why and who we want to spend our life with and our time with, then something might be very like this beautiful shiny object, and there's prestige involved, and it tickles our ego and all sorts of things, and then we realize a little bit too late that, oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do. But the clearer we are in the outset, we just say, hey, thanks for the opportunity, but no thank you. And we move on, and we don't waste that 1.5 months, and we can walk into this other much better opportunity that will definitely come. It always does. You know, it's not us looking for the right things, it's becoming the person that attracts the right things. It's sort of what I'm feeling is happening more readily. Becoming magnetic to the right things and the right people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes certain things pass by you as well, you know, to give you lessons, you know, and to see, you know, if are you still, you know, still in the same old structure, or are you adapting whatever things that you've learned? Because otherwise, these things keep on keep on appearing in your life.
Yeah, I mean, like it's learning never stops, and I sort of, the older I get, the more I realize that every struggle is just another word for a learning and growth opportunity.
100%.
And, you know, And like we are, I think I would go as far as comfort is the enemy. You know, it's a little bit like when you go to the gym, if the next day it doesn't hurt everywhere, you haven't really worked hard enough. And people who go to the gym, they you see them and go like, oh, everything hurts. That's great. Like they fall in love with the pain sort of thing. And I think on a personal growth level, I think there's a parallel there. So if we are not a little bit uncomfortable all the time, I think we're doing it wrong. I mean, if we are leaning in too far and we get hurt or our traumas get triggered, we have to pull back, of course. And sometimes we need total rest and just, but generally speaking, you know, if there's something uncomfortable, that's probably a good thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
I always say that, you know, I have a lot of challenges, you know, and I be down on my knees, but at the same time, there's some element of excitement also in me because I know I'm about to level up. So
exactly.
It might sound a bit crazy.
It's just behind the horizon. You're like, just keep going. Yeah, so it's meaningful like, endurance.
Correct. Stay right there. Find the lessons, and then you know something great is waiting for you. Excellent.
Exactly right. I agree with that. Yeah.
So, Bonny, okay, toxic masculinity, admittedly, is not something talked enough, you know, in our world. And yet it is one of the greatest struggles in the workplace, especially being women, and even for men. You know, like I feel this toxic masculinity, it doesn't apply to just women. It basically apply to anyone that you know they could.
I mean, bullying happens to all genders, right? But of course, there is, you know, a general notion that there's a lot of toxic behavior in workplaces. And when you say the world of, that's probably again a really big statement. You live in Singapore, I live in Australia. I used to live in Australia, lived in the US for a while. So, but I wouldn't have the first idea what it feels like to live in Pakistan or in Indonesia, or what it would be like to live in Denmark, or I don't know, so in South Africa. I have no idea. I can only talk through the anecdotal lens of my life and what I've experienced. Plus, I don't have the first idea what it feels like to be a woman out there in the workplace. All I know about that is through employees, which is probably filtered, and my partners, and of course, like, you know, literature and movies and so on and so on. But so I'm not an expert in that at all, and I don't want to claim that. I just know that there needs to be a homogeneous, fair playing field in the workplace, and any monoculture in business puts the business itself into disadvantage. So it's not just a social endeavor, it is also really good business practice to remove toxic masculinity and from the workplace and foster equity, equality, and inclusion across genders, race, ethnicities, everything. Because then when problems arise or opportunities arise, you can look at them from so many different vantage points that if they're all, you know, middle-aged white males, they just totally miss. You know, like I'm to the present day, I cannot understand that the biggest companies that produce tampons and feminine hygiene products and bras and panties, most of them used to be male led companies, and I go like, wow, that is so strange. So and that is a very, very obvious angle on like how a man, like how would a man possibly be able to design a comfortable bra? It's just impossible, right? And that is an obvious angle, but there's so many more angles where you just need the input and the different vantage points of every level of society, really.
Yeah, I agree. So do you think you mentioned before that toxic masculinity is one of the greatest contributor of mental health issues?
Yeah. So that's something, as you mentioned, I'm a startup coach. So I coach CEOs of startups, entrepreneurs around the world. And in the startup world, the majority of the founders are still male. More and more female founders emerge, and some of the best and brightest startup founders are female now. Like if you're familiar with Canva, for example, you know,
Yes.
that's a female founded company, and
I know of her
it's,
story. She's
yeah,
amazing.
she's incredible, you know. So, and this is happening more, but generally speaking, statistically, it's still more men, and the whole culture, there's a very aggressive culture there. It's reflected in the language. I always pay a lot of attention to language. When two founders meet each other at WeWork sort of thing, and they're like, "How's it going?" "Oh, killing it." And I think that's a terrible, terrible term, you know, or squashing it, or whatever. And I go like, dude, you're growing a startup. How about growing it? Fostering it. Like, it's such a strange,
Wow.
strange term, killing it. But it sort of on a subconscious level reflects that understanding of dominance, and business is war, and it's not. It's actually about collaboration. It's about vulnerability. It's about
I
communication.
like this.
Yeah.
These things, what you just did, what I'm hearing is a shifting it to be more gentle, instead of, I mean, it's to me, instead of using all those words that can, on a subconscious level, can be overwhelming, or, I can see how it can be affecting the mental health space from the subconscious level.
So on the mental health space, those dominant masculine attributes and expectations create a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up as a cis male, and I find it, to the present day, I find it super.
Let's go back to, what's a cis male? I'm just gonna, I don't think everybody knows exactly what's a cis male.
Well, I identify as male. I'm born with a penis, and I still identify as a male. That's
Why not? I mean, like, I know I've seen this cis male. I googled it. So, but I why not just, I'm a male? Why do people add now? There's so many,
Yeah,
terms.
it's a complicated world, and I think that would probably be enough conversation material for another show.
But cis male basically
But
just means that, like, a born male and still a male.
yeah, exactly right. So, and there's so many genders and so many ways of looking at that, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter in terms of who we are and what we do in the world. But there's a lot of struggle for people who don't fit into this traditional polary mold, right?
Yeah.
But that's a different discussion for another day. What I'm trying to say is, when I grew up, boys need to be strong. Boys don't cry. Suck it up, buttercup, and this whole thing. And I had a fairly progressive father, but just the society around me, there was that expectations that boys behave in a certain way. So there's a society's expectation, and then not only other boys, also the girls, because the whole society thinks this is how it has to be. And then we grow up, and to the present day, I find it super difficult to cry, and I envy my partners who can cry readily. When they're sad, they just cry. And and I would love to, I have to literally sit down and watch a sad movie so I can cry. It's ridiculous, but it's ingrained. And that's not, I wasn't born like that. I was shaped into that. And again, I grew up in a fairly liberal household, right? And then there's other household where that is much tougher. So as a general rule, men find it very difficult to ask for help, for example. I see that all the time with my startup founders, that all the female founders go, hey, I have a problem, can you help me? No problem. Females asked their friends and they share, or hey, can you just listen? I just want to vent, all that sort of stuff, right? When a man asks another man for help, that means he is at his last resort. Like when a woman asks another woman for help, that's one of the first things she thinks about, right? And for us, as we try to figure it out ourselves, which is incredibly hard, and that's probably also one of the reasons when a woman wants to talk to a man about whatever grinds her gears that day, the man automatically switches into solving mode, and the woman's like, hey, I don't need you to solve this. I just want you to listen. And as a man, you go like, what do you mean just listen? Because for us, you bring me a problem, the only reason for that could be that you need a solution, because otherwise you figure it out yourself. This whole sharing thing is not, we don't learn that well, right? And so I'm at these startup accelerators, and there's all these CEOs, and and they're all killing it, as I said earlier. And then on the Friday afternoon, they all sit around having a bottle of beer and let their hair down a little bit. And then you realize when you look behind the curtain, the kitchen is on fire every single time. Like they're all, like my wife and I, we're not doing so well right now. I'm working too much. I'm not seeing my children. I feel so guilty, blah, blah, blah. And it's all these things. And at no stage did it occur, broad generalization, but on no stage does it occur to the man to just ask for help, to go to your partner, lay your head in their lap and say, hey, I'm lost. I'm not feeling so good, or I'm sad. We don't do that because we think that we are not loved if we are not strong.
Right. Okay.
And that hurts us. And that's why substance abuse is such a big subject amongst men. Suicide rates are through the roof, like much higher than with women. So it's while there's a lot of privilege and dominance, and to the untrained eye, you think like, oh, you have it easy. There's an internal struggle because of all that and the expectations that's also toxic inwards. It's not just an outwards thing towards women and other people in general. It's a toxin that seeps inwards, and deeply unhappy men. And as I said, I had burnout in 2004, and that was because I sort of tried to be the best father, tried to be the best husband, tried to be the best son, the best CEO. And I didn't ask anybody for help. I just just work longer, work harder, just if I just work through the weekend, and behind that hill was another hill, and there was higher, and there was another one, until one day I just didn't get up in the morning. I just laid there in the fetal position. My kids came in, and I didn't even acknowledge them. And that was horrible for everybody. And that was a major wake-up call for me to have more awareness, and find a way to let go of all this armor, all this stuff that didn't serve me anymore. Yeah, all that conditioning. And it's ongoing. That's 20 years ago. That's still ongoing. I'm still working through that. Yeah.
Same. I crashed in 2014, 10 years after you. Rihanna today is different. Keep on learning, keep on growing. But yeah, I was bang, 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 going on, trying to do my best. And one day I totally crashed, literally couldn't get up. I had to be carried to the
washroom. Horrible.
And
That's
like,
horrible. I didn't
yeah,
shower for like 2 weeks or something. Like that was a major achievement, just having a shower. And so managing depression is part of my life. I mean, like I haven't had a depression bout in a long time, but it's an ongoing thing. So like meditation, awareness, you know, and personal growth are with me all the time. And in a way, I'm deeply grateful that that happened. I mean, I wish I could have learned in a different way, but that was my path.
yeah,
And it sort of started me to embark on this path. And I'm a much happier person. I'm a much better partner. I'm a much better father.
yeah,
And, you know, like I don't have everything figured out at all. Like, and I can ask for help. And, you know, sometimes I just feel shitty. Thank you very much. And that's just how it is. I don't have to be strong
sure.
all the time. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And you
totally.
know what? My partner still loves me, even if I'm crying and not feel so well. In fact, you know, I think without being totally open and vulnerable, you can never really get really close to each other, you know? So, and I think my relationship are now deeper and have a higher quality,
Beautiful.
and then they're
Yeah.
closer. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually the next thing I was about to ask you, and exactly that. Like, I mean, I imagine that unable to be um, fully you as in man, you know, unable to be vulnerable. Do you think it impacts the intimacy um, of a relationship, or perhaps maybe even any relationship or connection, meaningful connections? You know, and I think you just answered me in a way.
And I would say yes. I always say that without trust and respect, there is no relationship, and that's any relationship. That's a business relationship. That's, you know, in the family, and of course also in romantic relationships. And in business, it's very easy, you know, to just let go of people you don't trust and you don't respect, or they don't trust you and don't respect you. I don't even go further. That's it. That's the end of. I said bye, bye, bye. You know, we don't have to deal with each other. And in a romantic relationship, of course, it's even more important. And I personally feel you cannot truly trust somebody if you haven't seen behind the curtain of their vulnerabilities.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're always hiding a very important aspect. And I think trust actually relies on that. In business, of course, it's on a totally different degree, but you can still share a tiny bit of vulnerability, you know, like may it be that you talk about your kids, or, you know, I got into this business because, you know, because I want, like I lost my father when I was young to cancer. Now I want to be a cancer surgeon, or I like something that shows,
Personal
hey,
story. Yeah.
a personal story, something behind it. And in a romantic relationship, I think that's, of course, goes much deeper. And if it breaks the relationship, then maybe it wasn't the right relationship.
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, in the past, I wasn't able to be vulnerable as well, but
Mm.
I learned it the hard way after the crash. You know, I think it was like you. I wouldn't want anyone to have depression, but in a way, I do think that I'm grateful for it. I feel like it's a gift. It was the breaking of um, of the shell that I've been, you know, protecting myself, and so it was a game changer for me. But again, it's through the very, very, very hard way. um,
Don't let a good crisis go to waste, hey?
no, no, absolutely not. No, I'm certainly very happy where I am now. You know, I learned so much out of it, and still forever learning and sharing
Same.
actually my learning
Yeah.
curve, so that other people don't need to crash like us. Yeah,
Yes. I mean, sometimes it's actually, sometimes I wish people do not need to be rock bottom to learn, but sometimes that is the only way
correct.
to actually understand where you don't want to be, you know? So, um, it's sort of that hot plate analogy, right? You can tell somebody do not touch the hot plate 1,000 times, but once you touch it, you definitely know that you don't want to touch it anymore. I think it's a little bit like that. You just don't want anybody come to harm. And of course, you can't really help anybody if they haven't asked for help. Obviously, then that's a futile endeavor.
Sure. So coming back to the topic of men and not able being vulnerable, I mean, this can apply to anyone who's not able to be vulnerable, right? And we both agree, in our opinion, that it's such an important aspect to build a meaningful connection in any relationships. How would you, what would you advise men how they can improve in this area? You know, I think at the end of the day, I don't think people even realize certain of their behaviors might be toxic, or maybe not be serving other people, and maybe they're just not able to do it. Like they want to not able. Is there any advice or practices, simple ones?
Well, it's a very personal path for everybody, and I would like to actually zoom out, and you just shared that you were unable to open up at one point in your life. So you had that level of masculinity about you as well. And, you know, so I wouldn't call it toxic masculinity, but maybe it was to a level even toxic masculinity. So it's not a man or women thing. Yeah. It's a gender thing. So as I said, anybody can be masculine, and we can all have these properties. And sometimes, and maybe you can talk more to that, but there used to be, in the early days of feminism in Germany, women imitated men in their behavior to get to the top, and it was sort of necessary as well, you know, to be respected, and they had to be really, really tough. But it was still the same wrong attributes on both sides. And if you ever, you know, you're probably too young, but you know, if you ever seen Margaret Thatcher, that's a really good example of that sort of toxic masculinity in women. So I would say, generally speaking, you want to have an ability to self-reflect, right? So meditation and awareness is probably a really good thing. Like everything else, the best path is through education and learning, but really early on, like in the family, but also in school. You know, it's sort of, if children grow up with gender norms being a lot more supportive, then that is normal. You know, like we grow up in a certain way, that's what we expect as adults, and that's how we behave. So, you know, we have a responsibility as a society at large. So I think education is very important. But if we can't wait for the school system to catch up, then we can at least do it at home or with the people around it and the kids around it, I guess. Yeah. We can challenge, like challenging is always fun, you know, challenging gender norms, for example, and throw a little bit of a spanner in the work. Yeah. Then maybe women, while they have no responsibility, but it would be super nice to share their ability for connection, and you know, you can sort of, hey, teach your man, like, what sort of man do you want to have, and just like, hey, and open the doors a little bit towards that behavior. I think that might be nice.
Yeah, because like I mean, as you mentioned earlier as well, it's absolutely true that, you know, both men and women, you know, at some stage, you know, it's hard. Being vulnerable is hard for everyone. However, it's tough. Harder for men because men were raised, conditioned not to show vulnerability, you know. Yeah. Like for me, in my family, I grew up in a very, very tough family, not privileged at all. So we were raised, you need to take care of yourself. No one is going to come and save you. You need to protect yourself. Things like this, no tears. you know. However, I think at the I break through that. At the end of the day, I'm able to um, be vulnerable. But I think because I had a bit of privilege because I'm a woman. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas
In that regard, you have the privilege, like when you cry, you will not be eaten alive by the males around you. People will come to comfort you,
yeah,
right?
it's uncomfortable, but it's still easier. And as much as I always encourage men to to just own, this podcast is about embracing the whole full experience of being human.
Yes.
But I feel for men, that, and they know as we speak, like I'm sure a lot of people are going to tune to this particular episode. They know they need to be more, to be more open about their emotions, but it's really hard, you know.
It's baby steps, and I think it's very important when we open up a little bit that it feels good and that we get sort of a positive experience out of that, and maybe we need to do that in a safe place.
All right.
Maybe we need to do that maybe not with our partner, maybe not with our boss or colleagues or our friends at soccer or God knows what. I'm a really big advocate for everybody should go to therapy. We all should go to therapy,
Yeah.
So if I have a toothache, I'm going to the dentist. If I have a sore shoulder, I'm going to an osteopath. And just for the regular oil change of my soul, I'm going to a therapist. And I think that is a super safe place to practice vulnerability and getting really positive feedback on that, and that feeling walking out of that place that, I've been carrying that shit around for so long, and then I feel actually a little bit lighter, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. In fact, that other person thought, wow, that's, respected me for that. And then we learn, and I'm so determined about that. There's no stronger man than the man who can be vulnerable, So I
Absolutely.
think when there's a super big difference between a tough guy and a strong man. I think nothing is sadder than being a tough guy. That's totally closed off to everything. But strong means, hey, I'm weak. It takes so much strength to say that as a man.
Yeah.
That's if that becomes a little bit more of a respected attribute, that's like, whoa, like he just admitted that he's not knowing everything. He just admitted that he is that he's vulnerable right now.
Yeah.
That's a strong guy. Wow. Like I think we can all as a society foster and encourage people sharing their vulnerability, and the experience we get from that, then the experience of being a little bit more authentic and showing up with our vulnerability, warts and all, the connections that we form are suddenly much stronger. And I had this experience over and over where I just go first. I meet men and we go out for having a glass of scotch, and sitting down, and I'm just vulnerable. I'm just sharing some stuff that's on my soul, or like there are things in my life that make me sad, or that I just don't have a good, like the other day, about 3 months ago, I had a major what's the word, mortality was on my mind a lot. So as I get older, I go like, shit, man, it's like I'm getting older, and like this is only going one way. And I thought like, well, death and this, that, and the other, and it was really weird, and it was in a really weird headspace. And luckily, a few years ago, I started to foster male relationships, like true male relationships, not the sports bar sort of, role, but more the, hey, I'm feeling really vulnerable around mortality lately. I feel like, like growing older feels really strange. And I think this is how do you feel about that? And like, you know, like, and
You're having a real
the,
conversation.
having a real conversation, and the depth of the relationship just grows so strong suddenly, and everything becomes better, and I feel like a much stronger person because of it. It's really, it's when I think back of the days where, you know, try to be tough and everything, I felt much smaller back then than I do now. I feel much more confident and much more present than I ever did. So it's the exact opposite of what you expect back then.
Exactly. I totally agree
Mm,
with you.
mm,
I think, I mean, the more I'm able to lean to the truth of my emotions, I
yes.
I feel I am, I mean, I will never be perfect, but I feel I am much more.
Close.
Thank you very much. um, much more powerful in a way as a human being than I was before.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
before it was more like a forced strength. Now,
Yeah.
you know, I could cry when I feel like it. I could, you know, unleash my fire, you know, from my passion
Yeah. Yeah.
when I feel like it. That's this freedom of owning up to whatever I am that just makes me feel free and powerful, so to say.
Strong. Yeah. It's
Strong,
powerful,
yeah,
isn't it?
strong,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's it's so
I feel the exact
liberating.
same.
And I really like uh, earlier on when you mentioned as you shifted to you know, being more open, talking about your feelings to your partners, you're actually more received, and they still love you for who you are, and if not, if anything, it strengthens your relationship.
Yes.
So
Mm.
this is a great example of total opposite. Just to reinforce what Bonnie said earlier, you know, the result is totally the opposite of the fear of what we've been conditioned with. Yeah.
And I think if we are generally speaking in society, um, and encourage that more, make that, recognize it as something that's
A way of
when
life.
we see toxic masculinity in
Yeah.
workplace, we should, you know, I'm really sorry that you feel so small, that you have to behave like that. That is a much better approach than being offended. Like, just like, you're right, man. Are you okay? You know, like, that's like, I'm more often lately when there's a really aggressive person in my face,
Yeah.
rather than engaging, I go, are you okay? You know, so, and that is often so super powerful. Well, not always, but sometimes it
Is
actually just, you
is
know, melts
disarming the
down.
person. What you just did is disarming the other person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
it just simmers down. And seeing toxic behavior, and toxic masculinity in the workplace, let's say, um not celebrate it, but just see it for what it is, and just and not like, oh, you're weak. That's again an aggressive
Yeah.
gesture, but say like, hey, you know, you know, you can always talk to me, you know, if you're not feeling okay. So like,
Yeah.
and that is, you know,
Making me more
being the bigger
safe.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Mm,
like that. Thank you.
mm,
Yeah, and if I can add, like I feel one of my strengths with my clients is the fact that I could be open of my own emotions and vulnerability.
mm.
So it's relatable, and that makes it more
Yeah.
closer, our relationship more closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see the same thing. I can't expect anybody to open up in my coaching sessions. Um, if I mean, you have to be very careful, of course, and the
Yes.
line
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
very fine.
Mm.
However, I'm sharing my vulnerabilities and my path, and you know,
Yeah.
um, and I don't pretend that I have all the answers, because obviously I don't, you know. And I think, and interestingly enough, I that started way back, you know, when I drove my kids from school, and I was sitting in the back seat, and I asked them how was school, and then said, good. That was the end of the conversation. And then one of the teachers said, you know, just talk about your day. And so I said, oh, you know, my day today, I had this phone call, and then I did this, and that wasn't so good. And then I had I did some Photoshop work, and that was a lot of fun, and blah, 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 blah. And then suddenly they, from the back seat came the little voices, and they, talked about their day and about, like they had the fight on the schoolyard. And so, us starting to open up and showing vulnerability as a strength often invites the other side to lower their guard a little bit as well.
Absolutely. Yes,
Mm.
agree. Yeah. So, well, the other day, so I do sound bath therapy, right? I do sound bath healing. So the other day, one man, it was his first time coming to my session.
Yeah.
And he cried. I say something. Before I start, there's few things I say, and he cried. I tell him, he cried. He began crying, and his friends, they're known for decades since young, have never seen him cry. And I feel humbled, and I told him it's okay, and embrace it. You are in a safe space. I feel honored in a way, or humbled that people get let down their walls. Yeah. And
that's what I mean by, you practice it in a safe space.
Correct. Yeah. And I think one of the way that people can do is find places. I think when you are able to relax, right? When you can really able to relax, and that makes, that shift you away from the need to be constant fight and flight mode, fight mode.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that enables you to be a little bit more closer to what your true emotions is.
Well, it's all about safety, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. I mean, you are not able to relax because you don't feel safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, so here's the question. So women often find themselves facing societal pressures and expectations due to toxic masculinity. One is that they couldn't be fully themselves. Like we are expected to raise up to certain expectation of at work. At the same time, we also needed to be feminine, or what is expected of being a woman. In what ways can men actively participate in dismantling these structures in order to support women in their pursuit of equality?
Actively, I would say, like with all other inequalities, be it racism or fascism or bullying or whatever it is, when you see it, you stand up for it immediately. And
I like that.
let's just say there's a board meeting or something, or there's a meeting room, and some man talks down to a woman, or mansplains something, or is patronizing. Just tip him on the shoulder, take him outside, and talk about it. Not in front of everybody. That's I always find, criticize in private and praise in public.
Yeah.
But take him outside and have a quick talk and go like, hey mate, that's not on. That you might not have noticed. I give you the benefit of the doubt, but what you just said is really condescending, and I think you should have a talk with her and apologize later, or something like really stand up for it. Don't let it and this whole boys will be boys. No. Just know what's right and stand for it. And that is what I meant by sharing privilege. That's where my white male straight privilege comes in. I can talk to this man on an eye-to-eye level by default. I don't have to fight for it, and especially if I'm older as well, then I have like that elder authority at times.
Yeah.
And I can use that. So I can use my privilege to support and being ally for a starter. I think that's very, very important. And then again, education, inviting people to inherit a different vantage point, see things from a different angle once in a while, and then actively encouraging the diversity, you know, actually. So like, actually, that's actually a really good point. And it's especially difficult. So at that flipping point, you know, where women have more and more chances and are treated more and more equally in the working place, and they realize they don't have to emulate the men in order to be taken seriously. But
Yeah.
there's still that element where if you dress in a very feminine way, you automatically associate it, and you know, especially when you're pretty, then it's even harder. You know, you can't be feminine and pretty and competent. Like these things, like some men just don't understand that these three things are not mutually exclusive. They can all be in the same person. And
Yeah.
and actively encouraging that, and the way the men behave around that woman, I think it's very important, especially the higher up you are in the organization. You know, set the example and actually mean it. Because I mean, I've been in the business world for a long time, and there's a lot of political correctness.
Yeah.
And then the bros go to the sports bar, and none of that was real, and it's a really frustrating experience. And that's the moment where you call him out on that, you know, like and fostering true meaningful conversations. And they are uncomfortable, they might ruin the moment, you know, so be it. That's the price.
Yeah.
So being an ally, I think, is probably the short answer.
I really like it. Thank you. So
Mm.
how can men then learn to be more conscious and relearn on how to adapt to be more healthy masculinity? Again, when I
Mm.
say men, these can also apply to women, you know, wherever appropriate.
Yeah, no, I understand. But for the argument of this
This topic today.
session, yeah, um, I have observed a lot of boys in their 40s.
Okay, interesting that you say boys
Boys,
in their 40s.
yeah, there's guys out there who never really made the transition to men in my definition. You know, they're sort of never left that. And I'm always using that sports bar example because that's sort of my pet peeve, you know, this that behavior there. And I think that they missed the chance, and our society has sort of lost that social, what is it, like a social rite of passage. Like there's no true moment where you say, hey, you used to be a boy and you're going to be a man. You know, like a lot of societies have the rite of passage, and they have a very clear instructions what it means to be a man, right? And in many societies, you know, that is all not so progressive, but at least there is this line in the sand. And I think that would be a good opportunity to bring boys, you know, in the middle of puberty to a point where you're like, you know, you're not a boy anymore, right? Mom has to let you go. You're not a man yet, but this is what it means to be a man. And then come out of that a different person, like a young man, basically. And at that point, give them a healthy set of expectations of what it means to be a man in this society, how they relate to themselves, to the people they love, and to society at large. And I think that would be wonderful if something like that were readily available. I think that would be very helpful. And for men, I would say self-reflection. how do you get a man to that? I don't know, but I think being rock bottom is a good starting point usually. You know, that's when you have a lot of self-reflection. Education and learning, as always, you know, like if that is schools address bullying, you know, they can also address toxic masculinity. So challenge traditional gender norms when you can, you know, and catching out people. So I was talking to a woman the other day and I said, my doctor, blah, 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 blah. And she said, oh, what did he say? And I said, like, why do you assume it was a man? I'm challenging the gender norms, right?
Yeah.
So, and you can do that in a friendly way, in a joking way. You don't have to be aggressive about it, I guess. Cultivate emotional intelligence, you know, like, and that is something you can do with a therapist or somebody you trust. How do you feel? Like, most of the time I didn't even know how I felt. I knew what I had to do, you know, what my role was, but how do I feel? What do you mean how I feel? I have no idea. So, you know, really understanding what all these feelings and emotions mean that I in me. Try to be a little bit more humble and self-aware at times.
Yes, I agree.
I think that is probably a good way. And maybe in a workplace, engage somebody for empathy building practices. You know, sort of, there are certain things that we don't know of each other, of like that genders and sex don't know of each other, and just understanding, like, for example, I would readily say that women have a much higher pain tolerance than men. I think men are the weaker sex, but we are muscular stronger.
Yeah.
But in terms of resilience and pain tolerance,
Yeah.
I think if I ever had my period, I'd be a heap of tears in a corner, you know, and women soldiers through that don't even want to start with giving birth or anything like this. And just generally speaking, like, when I have the flu, I'm suffering in the corner. I'm like, oh, no, I don't feel so good
You
and
know
stuff. Like,
what?
and women don't do that.
About 9 years ago or something like that, I did a huge tattoo on my ribs in
Yeah,
Sofia, Bulgaria, actually.
yeah.
So it was a huge tattoo at the side, but I was quiet all the way. And then he said, "Do you want a break?" I said, "No, I'm okay." So eventually he took a break. So he has a translator because he don't speak English. So the translator told me, he said, "I'm strong because I'm a woman." He said,
I've
if
heard that from tattoo artists a lot.
yeah,
Women just
if
sit
it's
there and
not a man, if it's a
just
man, there's no way, he would have
and
had.
you feel the same pain. It's not that you have different pain receptors. It's the same pain. It's just women. So and recognize that women are super strong just because they don't have the muscle. And that's actually a very, very important point. And I think that is something I definitely want to say in this session, is something I never really thought about, is that women are more often than not physically not as strong as men.
Yes.
And that is extremely threatening. And I never thought of that because I don't see the world in that way. And I never thought about using my physical strength against women or dominating women. So, but it's a fact, right? And I realized that when I was around, I think there were basketball players or football players, like huge guys, like big, like 6'5" muscles. And I was standing there, and I'm not small, I'm 6'1". But I felt like I felt like a gentle little thing amongst these giants. And I go like, oh, that's what women feel like all the time. You know, so it's like there's this physical presence of strength, and there's like this paper thin wall of safety, you know, between. And so if somebody wanted to be violent, I would have no chance. And I think that feeling is deeply ingrained in the female mind, and men just don't understand that readily. We never think about that. When I'm walking home in the dark and there are steps behind me, then there are steps behind me. It doesn't really faze me. But like empathy building exercise to actually say, hey,
Yeah.
you know, like if there was a 6'5" big dude with a, you know, with this long stick walking behind, how would you feel? That's how the woman feel. Like, I think that is something that having that 24/7 wherever you go, that there's a physical aspect to the dominance of men, whether they assert it or whether they exercise it or not, but it's always there. And I think, you know, it would be a good idea for more men to understand that and realize that that is something that is actually there.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is, I speak for myself and I speak for few or many women that I spoke to before. Like,
Yeah.
we feel no matter how confident or how so-called successful we are in life, you know, there is still a certain degree of feeling of overwhelmed, not overwhelmed, intimidated, or fear when we are surrounded by very masculine men, or you know, and you know, I will be putting up a brave front, of course, you know, but my heart will be thumping, you know.
Yeah. And the men around you probably don't realize that is the case. And I think, again, the more we talk about that, you know, like I've learned that from my female partners, you know, that, and I go like, what do you mean? And then I go like, wow, you're right. That it must be really scary. And then I only realized because I felt it myself around really big burly guys, you know, like, oh yeah, like, so so it's about dialogue, it's about education, it's about this communication, right?
Absolutely.
Talking about it.
Yeah, and
This
because of
podcast.
exactly, thank you. And because of this unconscious fear, intimidation dynamic that women have with men, that sometimes that I've been in a situation where, you know, a man maybe says something not very appropriate to me. Sometimes I speak up, but sometimes I don't, because I go into shock first, and at the same time, my mind will think, is it okay if I say it to him? Am I going to offend him? You know, like, because there's still this conditioning that
That
women,
could be physically dangerous.
yes, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be if I'm in a scene. I had a situation where it was a drinking scene. He was drinking, and I wasn't drinking, but this man was banging my door. I locked myself in the washroom, you know, because and there wasn't much people around. And eventually, when I did tell someone, when I eventually did tell someone, his answer was, maybe you shouldn't be too friendly. So that,
Oh yeah, no, that's a whole different argument. Yes,
sorry,
yes,
you
yes,
know,
yes, yes.
but I think that, I mean,
Victim shaming.
yeah, that's not fair. And I went back home. I cried. I cried
Yeah,
because
right.
I turned to another man for security or safety, so to say, but only to be turned around saying that again it's me, you know. So
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, yeah. These things are horrible. I mean, like, of course, they happen to men and women, but they happen to women a lot more,
yeah,
and a
yeah,
lot more by men, and there's no real way out at that moment, you know, like unless you have learned kung fu or something like that. I mean, like, what do? You know, like, you have your mobile phone, you call for safety, you know, that's for somebody to step in. But and I've been in sort of precarious situations myself with aggressive men. It happens. Usually I run very fast, or I talk my way out of it, you know, sort of thing. But I had plenty of moments where I was just like, nope, I'm not saying, I'm just walking backwards and then I run. But yes,
yeah. So I
some
think,
men, yeah.
No, you're
especially under alcohol influence. That's, you know, that
that's
is,
why I'm scared. Like I generally I can speak for myself or speak my way through, but when there's alcohol, I know to keep my mouth shut. Well, most of the time
yeah,
I try, especially if I know he's more intoxicated, because I don't know what he's capable of. You know,
yeah.
alcohol does um,
You
impact.
got to remove yourself from that situation, right? Yeah, no, and that's not fair. And I mean, there's no such thing as fairness, but it's horrible.
Yeah, and I again I think coming back to what you say, having more conversation about empathy or trying to understand um, women. You I don't think women can truly understand what it's like to be man. Men can truly understand what it's like to be woman. But the more we have this conversation, you know, we educate ourselves, and perhaps we can close that gap. You know,
At least acknowledging that we don't know everything and that there are differences, and when you say something, just take it on face value, you know, like I feel threatened. And like in that bar scenario again, be like for other men to be an ally with the women and like being aware of how she could
yes,
feel at this moment. And when there is like an idiot, you know, making advances inappropriately, step up, not in a bro way, not having a pub fight, but, you know, just saying, hey, I think that was inappropriate what you just did. Or, you know, guard her safely out of it, you know, go on the dance floor or just leave the venue. Or I don't know, like, you know, it's just diffuse the situation, be a little bit more aware what's going
correct.
on. I think, you know, that's another thing we can do.
Yes.
Just yeah, yeah.
So we're coming to the end part of my podcast where I'm going to ask. So you will be the first person. I decided to ask a similar question to wrap up my podcast from now on to all my guests. But before I reach there, before I ask the question, I do want to summarize a bit of our conversation. That how you know, as women, um, how we can close the gap between men and women to be supportive of each other, is that we create, as when we create more safe space, so that men feel safe, and not lesser if they were to speak about their emotions. And the
Mm-hmm.
way we speak, the tone that we use is so important, and the language, as you point out, is so important.
Yeah, yeah.
And for men, I feel to stand up more for women, you know, to stand up for more for women, you know, not again, not in an aggressive way, but yeah, like at the end of the day, no matter
Stand
how,
up. Yeah,
yeah, how a woman is, but again, men have more say in
yeah.
many places still, and it will means a lot, you know,
Yeah.
for women, you know. And even though we are in a world where we want equality, I hope men don't confuse. Feminism is not about we are equal. Men and women can never be equal. In, you know, we
Well,
just
they're equal, but they're not the same.
yeah, yes, that's what I mean. And like it's just that um, we want equal in terms of chances, you know. Um,
Yes, yes.
but but yes, if we can support each other in these both ways, perhaps you know, little by little, we can bridge that gap
Yeah,
between men and women.
yeah. I would say it's not only equality, it's also an inclusion and equity. You know, like the ownership is also another part
Oh,
that is very
absolutely.
important.
Taking
Yeah.
responsibility. Yeah. Yes.
Mm, yeah.
So, Bonnie, you know, my podcast is about embracing the full experience of being human, which I
Okay.
believe will lead all of us to be more whole and successful. You know,
Mhm.
I feel when you suppress certain parts of being human, that's where then we have this void, you know, or a
Mhm.
feeling of not enough. So, in your opinion, how can we all be a more successful human being, whatever success means to each individual? Because it, you know, is a broad term. It means different to different people. Um, how can we all be a more successful human being, in your opinion?
All right. Good that you mentioned success. And I think in most Western culture, financial success means success. And while I don't disagree that it's nice to have money, I don't really agree with that being the measurement of success. A very good friend of mine once gave me a framed, handwritten poem of Ralph Waldo Emerson on what success means.
Yeah.
Actually, I would love to read that to you. Just we have my definition of success, and is that okay with you?
Of course, please do.
Let me just, I have that somewhere on my mobile phone. Let me just see if I find it. Almost there. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, what is success? To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded.
Beautiful.
So
beautiful.
I find that so beautiful. And by that measure, I'm so deeply happy and so successful, and it makes me, it fills me with so much joy. And it fills me with joy that I understand what success means for me. So I sometimes we get a little bit lost in the world. And how can I be a more authentic human being and present myself as who I truly am? I would say, of course, awareness, understanding what useful little things we came up with through our life to have defense mechanisms around injustices around us that were super useful at the time, but unfortunately they don't have an expiration date, and we carry them around for the rest of our life, even if they're long past their usefulness. So engaging in some sort of exercise, therapy, guided meditation, or whatever blows your hair back, but something that allows us to explore our shadow self and let go of stuff. So to become a better human being, we don't have to grow into something higher and learn more. We are pretty cool already. If we just let go of stuff, that's where the good stuff is. So that's number one. Number two is finding purpose. I think it's very important for us, for general happiness. I think a lot of aggression and comes from fear and unhappiness. So understand what makes us happy, what gives us the spark of joy. Have a really good understanding of what are we good at. Then understand what change we want to see in the world. So what grinds our gears, and how can, the things that we're good at and that makes us happy, how can that maybe be useful to make the world a better place? And then also understand what abundance means to us. I feel a lot of people find themselves making job decisions based on income. And I wouldn't say that that necessarily is a good idea. So we spend a lot of money to make a lot of money. Like we buy expensive suits, have this phone, have that car, that house close to work, blah, 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 blah. So that's not always all that necessary. And then we make all this money to buy stuff we don't need to impress people we don't like, right? And I think that's the one end. And I think on the other end, like have a quiet reflection on what abundance means to us. What do we want to see in abundance in our lives? And then sort of once we have a good idea, like for me, it's trees, fresh air. I like beaches. I also like big city and culture and music festivals. That's why I choose Sydney as my hometown. I also like the seasons over here. and it has a huge Asian population, so I like the food. So like this, I like these things. And if I would still live in Hamburg, Germany, and I love the beach and warm weather, I just have to spend a lot of money to get that for 3 weeks a year, right? So a lot of things come for free that we want to see in abundance, and good, deep, meaningful relationships and conversations, and be surrounded by inspirational, intelligent people and creative people and that sort of stuff. So understanding these 4 things, happiness, what am I good at, what change do I want to see in the world, and what do I want to see in abundance, and then ignoring opportunities that don't touch all 4 points and focus on opportunities that include all 4 points. They don't have to be equally strong, but at least, you know, following our true North Star. And then we become already to ourselves a more harmonious, happy person. And I'm not sure, I don't know if there's any scientific evidence, but I would readily assume that it would lower our toxic masculinity right there, and present ourselves to the world in a more fulfilling way.
I like it. I love it. Thank you so much, Bonny. I truly enjoy our conversation. I seriously do.
Yeah.
Such an honor to have you with me. So
Thanks for having me.
my pleasure, and I'll definitely have you again in future.
Sure.
Definitely I would. And you can find Bonny at www.bonnymorlak, morlak.com. I'll be sharing on the write-ups where you can find Bonny. So thank you so much, Bonny. It's been a pleasure, and we'll catch up again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See ya. Bye.
Bye.